I'd like to welcome everyone to another episode of Uncut Threads. It's a chat series that explores the world of quilting through conversation with special guests. Each week we examine ideas, traditions, creative practices that shape quilting as both a craft and an art. My name is Cheryl Hills, and I will be your host for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We're glad to have you with us today, and we look forward to a thoughtful discussion. Today's discussion is about long arm quilting. Is long arm quilting a specialized craft or simply an extension of using a domestic sewing machine? I have with me today my guest, Melody Ray, who will be joining me in this discussion. Welcome, Melody. Can you give us an introduction of yourself?
Thank you. As Cheryl said, my name is Melody Ray. I live outside of Baltimore, Maryland. I've been quilting since 1981. I'm a retired Fed. I'm married. We have 3 daughters and 6 grandchildren.
Fantastic. Welcome to today's episode of Uncut Threads. So we'll be talking about long arm quilting versus domestic machine quilting and hand quilting. And first, I'd like to just say, what on earth is a long arm quilting machine? What does it do? What makes it so special? A long arm quilting machine is designed specifically only to do quilting. It has a long arm or a long throat space that can accommodate a very wide piece of fabric to quilt at one time. It can be a machine that is set into a table where you actually move your quilt fabric underneath that large quilt throat space, or it could be set on a frame where the actual machine glides on a track on wheels and you guide the machine while the fabric stays stationary on the frame, and then you just advance the quilt as you advance your quilting. There are many manufacturers of long arm quilting machines, and they've been around for a very long time. What I'd first like to talk about is my journey to getting to long arm quilting. And then we'll have Melody talk about how she got from sewing to long arm quilting. And then we'll talk about our preferences. So I started out, the first quilt I ever made, I actually took 2 bed sheets and hand quilted them together. And that was the very first quilt that I did in high school. Then the next quilt that I did, I actually sewed on my domestic sewing machine, and it was a grandmother's fan quilt. But I hand quilted it. And that took a very long time, and it was in a frame that you would sit at. But that's where I really started quilting and using a sewing machine for quilting. Then for a long time, I made some small pieces, and they were machine pieced and hand quilted. And at that point in time, I didn't know anything about a long arm machine, let alone how to use one. Right? Then came along Quilt Africa Tribe, and I started making bigger quilts and trying to use my domestic sewing machine to do a twin size bed quilt is basically what cured me of trying to use a domestic machine to quilt. So I actually went back to smaller size quilts rather than using a long arm. So that is my journey from beginning quilting to actually using a domestic sewing machine and then advancing on to a long arm to do bigger pieces. Melody, can you tell us a little bit about your journey from sewing to using
Well,
long
let's
arm?
see. The first time I remember wanting to make a quilt, I was recovering from the mumps. And that's something people don't even get anymore. And I remember being in bed and telling my mother that I wanted to make a quilt, and she brought me a basket of scraps and a needle and thread, and I was hog heaven for the rest of the afternoon. The first quilt I made was several years later. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember Holly Hobby. They used to, and it came in panels. And I quilted a panel for my oldest daughter, and she had it for years. Then in 1981, I took a class with Barbara Schaefer at Fort Meade, and I learned to hand piece and hand quilt. The very first quilt I started was a grandmother's flower garden quilt. And it took me years to get it pieced, and I'm still haven't finished quilting it. In the meantime, hand quilted several other quilts. When my when my niece went to college, I had made a quilt for her and I did it on the machine. And that was when I knew that I would never quilt another one. I would never do another one on the machine. And that was just easy. That was just following the lines in the quilt. But I kept on piecing tops. So I have tops and then get them finished and they go to the person they were supposed to go to. But I guess when I first started quilting, nobody was machine quilting quilts. We were hardly machine piecing. Everything was done by hand. And so I guess it was maybe late 90s, early 2000s, I started hearing about long arm quilts. But at that time, they were way out of my budget. Fast forward till about 4 years ago, I saw one on Facebook Marketplace. I knew that I did not want electronics. So I have a 2007 APQS Lenny on a 10-foot frame. It is large enough to do all the quilts I want to quilt, but I'm just really getting started with it.
So let me ask you this about long arm quilting. Have you ever gone back to using a domestic since you've gotten a long arm? Have you ever
Not
switched
for
back
quilting,
to?
no.
No, you are
No.
totally converted.
Right. Now I had neck and shoulder problems and trying to get that quilt through the throat of the machine. Even though my new sewing machine will allow me to quilt hoops, I only make twin size and up quilts. So it's still a matter of having to hold it and wrangle it through. So no, I don't think I'll ever go back to machine quilting.
So has the switch from using a domestic sewing machine to a long arm machine changed your style in any way?
No, I still prefer the old traditional patterns. I don't do a lot of contemporary things. So no.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the type of quilts you like to quilt.
I like to do the traditional quilts, the grandmother's flower gardens, the long arm, grandmother's flower garden, 9 patches. I like to do, see, I did have hand pieced a bridal bouquet for my granddaughter. Let's see, what else? Basically, I'm not an artist. That's it. I am not an artist. I can't draw a straight line with 2 rulers. So for me, using the rotary cutter to cut strips and blocks makes it a lot easier than trying to freehand.
All right. So do you think that your style has evolved in any way, even though you follow a very traditional path?
I'm using more contemporary fabrics. I'm incorporating more African-inspired quilt fabrics in what I do rather than just solids and prints. I've enrolled in the Block of the Month Club, and that's beginning to free me from the straight lines and rulers.
So let's talk a little bit about being freed. Because I have to say that my experience with Quilt Africa Tribe has freed me from a lot of the constraints that I definitely had in sewing. I definitely am a traditionalist. I do like the traditional patterns. I do like the traditional quilt designs, but I think I have changed once African fabrics came into my quilt world. And
Right.
I have definitely changed my style. I've changed what I like, what I don't like, what I'm willing to explore and kind of test out. Has working with new fabrics changed the way you quilt or see quilts or design quilts?
I think it's changed the way I see them. I can see the beauty in them that I may not have done otherwise. Because a lot of times people will tell you that African fabrics are garish and that you can't work with them in traditional piecing, but you can. You just have to be cognizant of, just like anything else, pattern placement and fabric placement. Um, yeah.
So when you're working with African print fabrics, what type of considerations do you make when using those prints because they
Basically,
are bigger?
basically pattern placement. Um, you want to be able to capture the print, but you don't want the print to distract from the pattern either. So it's basically playing around with where you're going to put your pattern piece, how you're going to cut it, what you're going to put with it. Are you going to go with a traditional dark or a muslin? Are you going to use a smaller print that might read as a solid? Are you going to use not perhaps brighter colors like reds and oranges as your background?
Do you think those fabrics have taken you a little bit away from your traditional style when you're talking about using bright colors? Or
Probably not, because the things that I'm going to show you today are all older pieces. I don't have anything that I've finished lately with a contemporary, with an African print, other than the things I'm working on for the Quilt Africa Block of the Month. So yeah, I'm probably a bit older than your typical audience too. Because like I say, when I talk about months, that was back in the 60s. So
okay, okay, all right, all right. So let's talk a little bit about that transition to the using the long arm.
okay.
What was the learning curve like? What was it? What was day one like when you first put your hands on a long arm? And was it the one that you have in your home, or was it somewhere else?
The very first one I practiced on was down at a quilt shop in Montgomery County. I went there to see if I thought that I would like it. And I did, but the thought of having to drive 2.5 hours to get there and then 2.5 hours back, and what if I didn't feel like going the day that I had booked, that really made me decide that I wanted one in my house. Um, but it was like learning to drive blindfolded and drunk. The machine was not go where I wanted it to go. And what I had in my mind is not what came out on the quilt top. Like I said, I am not an artist, and so I typically have to follow things. Uh, it's been an experience. It's one that I'm learning and I'm loving, but it's been a real experience.
Your story is very similar to mine. The long arm, having a long arm, using a long arm, comes with a pretty steep learning curve. And my story is pretty much the same as yours. I was curious and I really wanted to make bigger quilts. So I went to my local quilt store here in Columbia, Maryland, and took a class and then booked some time to be able to rent the machine and do my own quilts. And I went in there with a panel quilt that didn't require a lot of work on my part because I didn't know what I was going to do to this piece of fabric, if I was going to
Right.
destroy it or not. So I booked 4 hours, which was their minimum, and got in there and basically had the class. So I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to put on it. I didn't know how to design or anything. I just knew how to operate the machine. So I started practicing some simple things, cursive letters and those type of things, wavy lines. And after a couple of hours of standing there in that store, knowing that, I can't just sit down, watch TV or take a break or whatever,
Right.
I was stuck there having to finish this quilt. So 4 hours later, I actually finished this quilt with a very simple quilt design on it. And I said I would never go back and have to stand in a store for 4 hours. There were a lot of restrictions. You couldn't change your own bobbin and you couldn't change your own needle. And there were a lot of things that made me feel like, oh my goodness, I'm going to break their machine. Like if I do the wrong thing, I'm
Right,
going to break this expensive machine. So I just really felt that I wanted my own machine and I wanted to be able to quilt when I felt like quilting for as long as I felt like quilting, and then could come back to the work without having to take it off the machine, take it home, bring it back, load it
right.
back up, and rinse and repeat over and over again until you finally get your quilt done. So that I definitely have in common with learning how to use a long arm machine and my first experience, and what drove me to actually biting the bullet and saying, I think I'd rather have a long arm than a new car. So that's kind of what happened here. So Melody, talk a little bit more about getting started with the machine. What was the first quilt that you did, and how did you come up with your design or what you did
I
with
did
it?
a couple of practice pieces first. In fact, I still have my first one on the frame right this minute. Um, like I said, I did a couple of practice pieces. I had the panel that I had done at the shop that I really didn't like, so I took it all out and I redid it. Then I added the next piece I did was just a plain white sheet with a quilt backing and batting, and I just played with it. I got a couple of books from the library that I liked well enough, and then I bought them. And I did a lot of practicing with, you could buy the plastic, the clear plastic. I bought a piece from Joann's and a dry erase marker. And I just practiced the stitches over and over again until I was comfortable with them.
Okay.
As far
Okay.
as choosing designs, I am, for the one I have on the frame right now, I'm just doing a simple meander, nothing fancy. I like, before I get to the fancy ones, I'm going to have to do more practicing, a lot more practicing. But this is for my niece my great niece who graduated high school, and I wanted to have it to take it to college. But she's a sophomore now, so she may get it by the time she finishes this year. I don't know.
Well, we just call that either a work in progress or a UFO.
I like work in progress. It's on the frame, so it's a work in progress.
There you go. There you go. So, what have you done to, it sounds like you've taken books out of the library and you've begun to learn some new stitches. What else do you do to increase your knowledge and skills around the use of your long arm?
I would like to take a couple of more in-person classes. There's a shop not too far from me that has them, but so far I haven't been able to fit them into my schedule, which is funny since I'm retired, but it just has, they have them on times I have pre-scheduled meetings. But I think at this point, it is probably just more practice. Just have to carve out the time to practice. And I say practice makes perfect. And so every hour you practice is an hour that gets you closer to where you want to be. So it's just practice, I think. And YouTube and talking to people that have long arms.
Definitely. Does it, do you think that it has any effect on your creativity, being able to just free motion quilt as far as just using the machine and just driving it wherever you want to drive it? Or do you feel more structured in when you use the machine?
I think it's probably a combination of both. When I was practicing, I felt that I could go where I want and do what I wanted. This quilt is a black and white pineapple. And so I have, so I want the stitches to be seen, but at the same time, I don't want them to detract from the quilt pattern. So I'm decided to use an all over meander. I have a couple more that I have one that I'll show you in a bit that I really want to go to town with feathers and all and just lots of feathers.
So what do you think is the biggest benefit towards your creativity in using a long arm versus a domestic machine or even hand quilting?
Actually having it in the house. That way I can practice and stitch when I want to. It's also much easier on my neck and shoulders. If I can't stand for 4 hours, I can go take a break and come back. With the domestic machine, it's just trying to push all that bulk through the neck. And even with the machine that I have now, I've got a pretty long neck, but still, it's still only so much when you're looking at king and queen size quilts, because I typically only make larger quilts. I don't do a lot of wall hangings and things.
So you've seen those contraptions that like hold the fabric up and keep it from dragging on the floor while you're trying to slide the quilt underneath the needle.
I don't think I have that much coordination. It looks like, I mean, to me, it looks like you're dancing. No, I have, it might work for some people, but I also don't have the space. I also do not have the space for one of those contraptions.
Consideration. That's
Yeah.
a big consideration.
Yeah.
Definitely. How does it make you feel when you've actually finished a quilt on your long arm? Does
I
it?
haven't finished one yet, so I'll have to let you know with that one. But
Oh, fantastic.
I haven't finished one yet. Like I said, the first one, the first real quilt is on the machine now. But when I finished the panel, I was surprised at how little time it took. That I was actually able to do it myself. Yeah.
So it's increased your productivity.
I would like to say yes, but I do so many other things and I have so many other things pulling on me that even though it's in the house, it's some days it's hard to find dedicated time to say, today I'm going to go in the long arm room and that's all I'm going to do. One day I was really going good and I ran out of bobbins. I thought I had more bobbins for the machine and I did not. So I had to wait for them to be delivered.
So it sounds like you use pre-wound bobbins.
Use pre-wound bobbins, yes.
And is that out of convenience? What's the reasoning behind that?
Probably convenience. This was as I said, this was a new to me machine, and she did not send bobbins. And I don't, maybe I got one or two, but she'd always use long pre-wound bobbins. And when I talked to them at APQS, they recommended pre-wound bobbins. So I just ordered 144 this time.
Okay, just a little gross. That's good.
Ordered a gross.
Well, that's great. I'm a wind it yourself person.
Okay.
I actually wind all my bobbins. Although someone in this quilt store yesterday tried to convince me to purchase some pre-wound ones, so I may experiment with that.
Do you have a bobbin winder?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah. So it's right on the side of the machine,
Okay.
and
My
it
machine didn't
actually
come with
has
one. So, okay.
a separate motor, so actually I can actually wind bobbins while the thing is stitching. So
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, so I do have a convenience. Are there any other things about your machine that makes the process more convenient?
Been using a domestic machine?
Yeah, or even as you've gotten better and progressed.
Let's see. Even with the largest hand quilting frame, you're not always sometimes able to get the entire width of the quilt on the frame, and you have to move it. I've had both the 6-foot frames and the smaller plastic frames. And so having the being able to put the entire width of the quilt on the machine at once makes it easy. You can see where you've been, you can see where you're going, and you can kind of sort of plan what you're going to do without having to maneuver the quilt top.
Yeah, I would say having a long arm brings about the convenience of being able to baste your layers together and monitor and keep everything flat so that the chance of having puckers and folds and those type of is lessened considerably
Okay,
when
now I
you
didn't
can
baste
set it
this
on a
one.
machine.
I didn't baste this one. I just put it on the rollers and I rolled all 3 layers separately. And then as I advance the quilt, I make sure that everything is straight and taut on the machine, and what's hanging in front is hanging straight.
Yeah, I find it to be quite convenient to be able to have everything on the machine and lined up and you can keep going and not really have to worry. And that I know my first hand quilted quilt was on a frame, an oval frame that was big enough that you could sit underneath it with a chair, but you had to move it, you know, because it was only about 2 feet wide. And you had to rearrange the thing and make sure everything was still flat and you didn't have any bunches and puckers. And by the time all was said and done, you still weren't sure whether the thing was going to come out flat or in alignment. So that's another advantage for me for having a long arm.
Right. It makes it easy to check the back to make sure there are no puckers. Yes.
So we seem to have some agreement in the chat also about winding bobbins, using your own wound bobbins. Question about, I'm going to go back just for a second here because we had somebody in the chat talk about the bobbin winding. Using pre-wound bobbins, are you using like a 60 or 90 weight thread, and does that thread match your thread for the top, or doesn't that matter?
I match my thread to the backing.
Okay.
As far as color, yes. I match, if so, I've got a light backing on the one that I have in the frame. So I have a off-white thread in the bobbin.
Okay. All right. Yeah,
And I
I
believe
would
it's
tend to use
60
the
weight.
same. A 60 weight?
I believe it's 60 weight, yes.
Okay. All right. So that probably sinks down into the fabric nicely.
Right.
Looks really good. I tend to use the same top and bobbin, same thread in
Oh,
the bobbin as in the top.
okay.
It's just
You mean color-wise?
yeah, I use the exact same thread.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Does your backing match your top and color-wise?
Not always. Not
Oh, okay.
always. Sometimes there's a big contrast, and sometimes, like the one I have on my long arm right now, there will be points where I'll use multi-colors. I'll use
Okay.
it's going to be quilted in white, some it's going to be in black, but the backing is a whitish color. I'll use white in the bobbin and black on the top.
Okay.
So with that, we'll
That's
go
an
into
easy
some
way
of
to
the.
check for tension problems too.
That's exactly where I was going. We're going
Right.
to talk technical because when you start doing things like using different colors, different types of fabrics, a machine can start to get temperamental on you.
Yes.
Can you talk about how you've managed some of the technical things in your quilting, tension, stitch length, those type of things with your long arm?
Okay, now my long arm has both stitch regulated where the machine practically pretty much determines your stitch length, and manual mode where you do it. I like manual mode. And for me, it's just easier. I can see what I'm doing. I can slow it up or speed it up as I see fit. My stitches are not always uniform, but they weren't when I was hand quilting either. So for tension, you play with it, sometimes up, sometimes down. And the good thing about being on the long arm and having so much space on either side of the quilt is that you can play with it in the parts that you're going to cut off and throw away.
Yes,
So you get it
absolutely.
right on the side, and then you move on.
Okay.
And I'm finding that once it's set, it's pretty much set. I don't have to do anything else to it until I'm finished. Hopefully, I think I've got 2 more passes and I'm done. So we'll see.
That's good. All right, that's
Watch, I
good.
go in there now and I'll mess up.
Um, you mentioned something that is a nice thing about having a long arm. I call it setting up a playground. And I may have just a little mini piece of fabric and batting and backing off to the side that I can play around with because free motion quilting is not my strong suit. And just to see if what I'm doing is okay before I take it to the actual quilt. So having a playground is really nice.
Okay.
So I just want to ask a little bit more about using manual mode because that's something that I actually don't do. I have stitch regulation and I've always used the stitch
Okay.
regulated setting. Um, you said it's easier. What about it is easier for you?
The machine doesn't take over when I'm in stitch regulated mode. And that could be because I'm a neophyte. I don't feel as if I have any control, and I am a control freak, which is why I don't send my quilts out to be done. Um, I just like being able to do what I want to do. I don't want the machine deciding that you're going too slow or going too fast. So
Okay. I'm gonna have to give it a try. I never have.
you do
I've
try
been
it. You'll like
spoiled.
it.
Definitely been spoiled. Um, but so you have that freedom and the ease of the manual mode. Do you do any kind of how do you set up your quilt for the actual quilting when it comes to the design? Do you draw? Do you use chalk? Do you use rulers? How do you actually get your design onto the quilt?
This time I'm free motioning.
Okay.
Doing free motion. I really would like to use the word went out of my head, pentagrams.
Mhm.
But that using the pentagrams and following a line is a lot harder than it looks.
Okay.
Talking about driving drunk and blindfolded, that's it. Even following the lines, I think I did a couple of passes on practice. I was like, no, I can't do this. Even if the pentagram was supposed to be a beginner pentagram, no, the machine wanted to do its thing, and it wasn't going where I wanted it to go. Um, I haven't done any ruler work yet, although my machine, I have to order a base for the machine in order to do the ruler work, but I do have the channel locks. So I'll be able to do straight line quilting without the rulers.
Okay. Channel locks are a great thing to have. I I will show a quilt in a little bit where channel locks made all the difference in the
Okay.
world in what I was quilting. It just allows for some accuracy that I don't think I could have gotten any other way, and certainly not on a domestic machine for me.
Right.
There's just no way. So where do you get your inspiration from?
For quilt designs for the long arm,
Yeah.
everywhere. I started a notebook and I have sketch designs in it. I'm not an artist. I'm not a good doodler, but sometimes I'll see something I say I might be able to do that.
Do you have any like motifs or patterns that you prefer to use?
Probably whichever one I'm using at the time. Like I said, this is my first one. So this is pretty basic, pretty simple meander.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You'll like how it comes out, that's for sure. This one behind me has meander in it.
Okay.
And it's hard to see, so it's forgiving as well.
Right.
But it's also close enough and tight enough that your quilt will be flat and it's dense enough.
Right.
I think you'll like your end result, definitely.
Okay. I didn't make this one really very dense. I debated that whether I was going to make it dense or not quite so dense. I went to not quite so dense. So we'll
Okay.
see how it works out. If it doesn't fall apart when she washes it, I'll be grateful.
I'm sure that has not happened to any of your works.
We
Um,
shall see.
so I think what I'll do right now, we're gonna go through just a little journey of our quilts.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do, I'm gonna share my screen, and I have about 3 or 4 slides that sort of show where I began and kind of where I am right now as far as my
Okay.
long arm journey is concerned. And then we'll have you show us the quilts that you're working on
Okay.
and have made. And you can talk about your quilting, domestic long arm hand quilting journey.
Okay.
All right, so let me share the screen. Okay, so obviously that's me. So when I was telling you the story about my first time doing a long arm quilt at the quilt store, this was the panel that I used. It's a
Okay.
Halloween panel, and I did the little checkerboard squares to do a border around it, but everything else is the panel. And this
Okay.
was the 4 hour quilt in the quilt store, feeling like I was going to break their machine. My feet were tired, everything. It just seemed like I was stuck there for way too long. And this was the quilt that told me that I wanted my own long arm and I wanted it in my house and I wanted to be able to quilt when I wanted and for however long I wanted to quilt. And if I broke the machine, it was on me and I didn't have to worry about anybody else. So this is a quilt I did last year. It's a collage quilt of the city of Baltimore. This was inspired by the Africa map that we did as a Quilt Africa Tribe project. And it really kind of took me out of my comfort zone because here I took all of these bright, vibrant pieces of fabric and put them all next to each other. And it was what I had. I just wasn't comfortable with putting colors that I thought didn't go together next to each other and everything. And now I have to say it's probably a signature part of my style now that I've been brought to. But this was done on my long arm. And what I find having a long arm, and I actually have the electronics, so I can electronically put in a design and the machine will automatically quilt it out. I found that I got a little crazy with it. And when I look at this quilt, that background totally distracts from everything else that's in the quilt. And all that negative space is all the same stuff. So for me, that's one of the things that you have to be careful of when you have a long arm. It's so easy to set it and forget it. And then that part sort of detracts from what you're really trying to show.
Okay.
So You can get a little crazy with your long arm, and I think this is an example of that. I was talking about using channel locks, and this is Quilt Africa Tribe 2024 Safari Block of the Month. And each month we got an animal to applique, and I didn't know exactly how I was going to applique them. The first animal we got was the lion, and I wanted to make it as real as I could possibly make it. And so it was yellow and it had the fur and all that. And then the rest of the animals I could not make look real. So I decided my animals were going to be any color that I felt like making them. And then I also felt that I couldn't put them in their habitat because that was just artistically something that I can't do. So I just put them on this orange background, and I decided that because that Quilt of Baltimore was so busy in the background, I didn't want to detract from the
Right.
actual pieces that were appliqued on there. So channel locks in a long arm is just the perfect way to get the machine to lock into perfectly straight lines, and you can just guide the machine in a perfectly straight line, move it down an inch and go back, and you can get a design that's dense enough to keep all your layers together, but not distract from the actual quilt motifs themselves. So I have one more, just a little closer up. So just using the channel locks allowed me to get evenly spaced lines and not really obliterate anything else on the quilt. And then that was my last one. Okay, that's my last one. So for me, having a long arm has been good, and it also has taught me some lessons about how to use it in moderation.
Okay.
All right. So Melody, why don't you take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about and show us some of your works?
Okay. See, I don't know how this is going to work. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. This is the one that's on the quilt right this minute.
Nice. So that's
My
a black
niece
and white
wanted
pineapple.
all black and white. And I asked if I could add gray. And she said if I could add an accent color. And I went back and forth between red and which would have been my favorite. But I decided that since it was her, I would go with the gray. And then then she gave me free choice of pattern. So I went with the pineapple.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love the
Um,
fact that black and white is not traditional. It looks great.
it does. It really, really does. Let's see. What else? Okay, now I only have tops. Like I told you earlier, once I have a quilt finished, it goes to whomever it goes to. I don't keep it in the house. This is a top that I made. This is a top that I made,
Very nice.
and I wanted to try out my embroidery machine. So I embroidered the hearts and added the blocks. Ran out of fabric, only to have a friend give me a bunch of fabric. She and her mother had owned a fabric store in South Dakota. And she gave me a bunch of fabrics because she wasn't quilting anymore, only to find a piece that was exact match for the print that I'd used in this one.
Oh, wonderful.
So let's see. I don't know. This way. When I was talking about the one that I want to do the feathers on, this is it.
Oh, that'll be nice.
Yeah, I like log cabins, and this is one of my favorite sets. Sunshine and Shadow. So
Very
the
nice.
plan is to put feathers in all the sunshine blocks. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do in the darker areas yet, but I'll have fun playing with it.
Oh, free motion feathers should be fun.
They're going to be fun. And then this is the last one I'll show you. And this is another non-packed variation.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And my husband is a musician, so in the border, I'm going to quilt musical notes.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
Yeah, musical notes and G clef.
Love it. Those are
Thank
very
you.
nice. Very
Thank you.
nice. Um, so Melody, I've been just glancing at the chat. So I want to address a couple of things in the chat, and I'd love for you to chime in. When we
Okay.
were talking about bobbins and winding your own bobbins and pre-wound bobbins, do you test the tension? I know you said you kind of work on the side and see if the tension's right. Do you test the tension in any other way?
Yes. I will put it in the bobbin case and I'll pull off a thread and I'll see how long it takes the bobbin case to drop.
Okay. And do you ever have any issues with top tension?
No, so far I have not.
Okay. All right. So I have a TOA gauge where you
Okay.
pop the whole bobbin in and you can set it to whatever tension is for your specific machine,
Okay.
where you just pull the thread through this gadget. It's a gauge, and you can adjust the tension based on what that gauge is reading, and then you can put it in the machine.
Is that just the bobbin tension?
Just the bobbin tension.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I have had, knock on wood, no issues as of today with any
Right. Okay.
tension, top versus bottom tension. I've been very lucky with that. But I also have to say that I'm pretty homogeneous with the type of fabrics that I've been using.
Okay.
You know, when you start doing things like t-shirt quilts where things change, then
Right.
bobbins and tension may play a bigger role in how your machine is set. I got a question about the appliques of the animals on my quilt. The animals were added before the quilting, and I literally just skipped. That's the beauty of channel locks. I literally skipped over the animal as I got to it and then started sewing again and skipped as I got to the next obstacle. So which also allowed me to change the color of the thread. So on the ocean, the thread was blue. On the map of Africa, it was black, and the orange background, I used orange thread. So the channel locks allowed me to skip, but still stay in that perfectly straight line and keep everything lined up. So Gemini, thank you for your compliment. There is a comment about your piano key border, Melody.
Oh, okay.
Love
Thank you.
It's been admired.
Thank you very much.
Do you have, so we have a comment in here about the tension issues may come about due to the type of thread that you use. Do you have a favorite thread or brand of thread? Or
I think right now I'm using a Gutermann.
Okay.
Yeah. And I haven't had any problems with it at all.
None at all? Okay.
Right.
My favorite is Glide. I like Glide. It's a polyester thread, so you don't get fuzz and all that stuff in your machine. But I also, it's got a little shine to it, sort of like a rayon type thread. So that's another characteristic of it that I personally like. But I also use signature threads in my machine also, and I've had good luck with both of those types of thread.
Okay.
All right. So you have one quilt, your first quilt on your long arm.
Yes.
What's going to be the next quilt that hits your long arm machine?
The one with the piano keys.
Okay.
That's my husband's quilt. That'll be the next one I finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what's the plan for that? What's the strategy you're going to use to tackle that design?
I haven't quite decided what I'm gonna do in the middle yet, where the quite decided what I'm gonna do in here yet. But I do know that in the salt and the borders, I'm going to do the musical keys, musical notes, and the G clefs. And I don't know. I might do I don't know. I might do G clefs in here and the triangles along the side. I may do a meander. I may put in the channel locks and follows and do some of the squares like in the 9 patches. So I don't know yet. That's the fun part, deciding
That
what I'm
is
going to do.
that is definitely the fun part. So you primarily make quilts for others.
Yes.
Okay. Um, have you ever made a quilt that you said, I just like this so much, I'm not giving it away?
No. Nope. If I'm making it for somebody, it's not mine to start with.
Okay. Do you have plans to make quilts for yourself?
Yes and no. Did a block swap years ago with angels, and I have enough angels to do 2 quilts. And I am of the mind that I'm not going to do 2 quilts. I'm going to do a reversible quilt. That way I get to keep all my angels.
Love it. That's actually the next quilt that's going on my machine will be two
Okay.
sides, um, and it'll be reversible.
Yeah.
Which is,
I mean, I think I've got like 36 blocks.
oh,
So
that's enough. Okay.
yeah, too big for
Uh,
single, for 1 quilt. So I'll make 2, but I'll just do it front and back.
well, we're going to have to compare notes on that because
Okay.
that's what's getting cut out here next. No
Okay.
doubt about it. Um, so, what does what does your future in long arm quilting hold? Where would you like to be in 6 months or a year from now in your long arm quilting venture?
6 months, I'd like to have at least 2 more done.
Okay.
And I would like to expand my free motion repertoire and perhaps get comfortable using the panographs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like I said, I don't have electronics. I could add them to my machine, but at this point in my life, I don't think I'm going to.
So talk a little bit more about that because I have my own ideas about that. What is it for you that makes you hesitate about the electronics piece?
I've got more yesterdays behind me than I do tomorrows. And I'm really not quite sure that I would get the use out of it that I think I would. Um, yeah, that's probably it. That's probably
Okay.
it. If life lasts, I'll be 72 in June. And as it is now, that if I don't do something with the stuff that I have, my kids are going to curse me from the grave because it's going to take them forever to get rid of what's in here.
That's most
Yeah,
people's problem.
that's it. More yesterdays than tomorrows.
Okay. Okay. So when I purchased my machine, I opted to get the electronics,
Okay.
and um, I have mixed emotions about it.
Okay.
Uh, in that I really like the idea that there's all this built-in stuff, and I can program it, and off it goes, press buttons, and away it goes, and it's got all these complex, designs and patterns. Um, and I love that. And then coming back to a little part of a quilt that I would much rather do free motion. I'm not that good at it because I don't spend the time at it, because
Okay.
I've got this electronic piece that I can just program and away I go. And I don't really get the time to put in to driving the machine, using manual mode, and just kind of, freehand creating. So it's restricted some, for me, some of my creativity because it's there and I can just go, oh, I'm going to do this, and it's much faster. And in some respects it is, in some respects it's not. If you're going to do like a pantograph edge to edge, it's nice. But if you've picked a design that's very repetitive, you can probably get it done as fast free
Okay.
motion as you can using the electronics, because you've got to stop, you've got to advance the quilt, you've got to reset, you've got to do all these things where you can just keep driving for a little bit longer when you're
Right.
free motion quilting it. So for me, I love the electronics. I think they're great. I think they're fantastic. But I also think that they take away from some of my creativity because I'm not just creating things on my own and drawing and just driving the machine the way I want to.
I think for me, one of the hesitancies I had about buying and actually doing machine quilting is that I did not want it to feel like it was something I'd bought in the store. By the time my way of thinking was, by the time you machine piece it and machine quilt it, I could go down to Sears and buy one. Or as somebody told me when they asked me the price for making one, I could go to Walmart and buy one. Okay, that's fine too. But because I like the feel of a hand quilted quilt. And I think, and with long arming, doing the long arming myself rather than the machine, I'm putting more of myself into the quilt than if I were to use electronics. But that's just Melody's thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like the idea of doing your own thing and it being yours and not, and I think that's the same reason that you said that you don't really want to outsource your work to anybody else.
Right.
You want the creativity to be totally yours and yours alone. So, as we begin to wrap up, what advice would you give someone new to quilting who is maybe starting out on a domestic machine or doing hand quilting and they want to maybe move on to long arm quilting? What advice would you give them to help them along the way?
The first thing I would say is to go to a shop, take a class, and buy a couple of hours on the machine. That will give you an idea of whether or not you're going to like long arming or not. Um, be gentle with yourself. As adults, we do not like to make mistakes and we think everything's going to be perfect the first time out. It's not. I always tell people who are teachers that it's always good to be a student. And as I tell, and so be gentle with yourself. You're going to make mistakes. Practice, 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 and practice more. And that's whether you're piecing on the long arm, the domestic, or if you're hand piecing or hand quilting. And above all, have fun.
Fantastic. And on that note, I think it's a perfect way to end this session of Uncut Threads. I want to thank my guest, Melody Ray, and her beautiful quilts, and your inspiration for being my guest today on Uncut Threads. And I want to thank everyone who's watching and will watch the replay. Thank you for joining in for this episode of Uncut Threads. Have a great rest of your day or evening. And until next time, have a great, great day. Bye,
Cheryl, thank
everyone.
you so much for having me. It was fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks, Melody.
All righty. See you later.
Bye, everybody.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Miss Mel. Thank you,